You're listening to Always Player One, a solo board gaming podcast.
Hello and welcome to Always Player One. I'm Scruffy.
And I'm Norm. So today we're going to be talking about the GM-less and soloable role-playing game Ironsworn. We're also going to be sharing our impressions of the solo role-playing hobby in general. But before we do that, a quick mention on the Discord. As you may already know, if you listened to the last episode, we made our Discord server now free to join. That has been kicking off. It is now hopping. We have, I think, just under 40 people on the Discord server, all chatting, having a nice time, discussing the podcast, discussing solo games. And a couple of games being played as well. I think Scruff and I are in a game of Food Chain Magnate. I saw a couple of other members of the Discord server are playing a game of Root. So it's good to see that people are playing who met specifically in the server. So that's pretty neat. So if you want to join, last episode we said to click the link in the description. Slightly bad advice because I didn't realize the Discord invites actually expire. So if you would like to be invited to the server, just send us an email or send us a direct message on any of our social media platforms, and we'll be happy to send you an invite. But yeah, that's been lots of fun. Have you been enjoying that as well, Scruffy?
Yeah, it's been awesome. It's really nice to see the chat every day. There's new stuff going on, and you know, you guys have just been so awesome and friendly and supportive. It really is heartwarming. You know, a hello to everyone who's listening, who's on our Discord already. You guys rock. I look forward to doing more stuff in the future. We're actually planning to do a tournament soon, so that'll be fun. Keep an eye on the tournaments channel. I imagine the first one will probably be Mage Night.
Yeah, maybe. We haven't fully got into it, but we'll do it with some feedback as well. What do you guys want to play? Let us know. So just want to maybe set a couple of expectations about this episode, because it's a little bit different to what we've done before. Obviously, the first one, probably the most obvious one, is that this isn't a board game, and this is still a solo board gaming podcast. But yeah, we just want to make it very clear, and I think we have made it very clear in the past that the podcast is one of exploration. As we are new to the solo gaming hobby, we want to take you on that journey with us, and we definitely get a kick, and I think our core listeners also get a kick out of us trying new things. We certainly got a lot of positive feedback when we did our first print and play episode. We're looking to do more of those, and this is the kind of content, as well as covering the really popular games like we have done with things like Mage Night and Spirit Island. We also want to bring you things that you might not have tried before. Equally, if you have just joined the podcast and it's your first time listening to us, you've seen the title, you're an experienced role player, and you're really excited to hear what we have to say, it's worth pointing out that we are extremely new. We're extremely new to solo role playing, so we hope you enjoy our fresh perspective and our sort of first impressions of your hobby in general. So I just wanted to get that out there so everybody knows where we are. Do you think that's fair, Scruffy?
Absolutely. That's a really good thing to say. Cool. So Ironsworn, right. I'll just give a quick overview of the game now. Try not to take too long with it, but it's a really deep system, so bear with me. Ironsworn is a role-playing game system designed to be played solo or in groups with or without a GM. To start the game, you are guided to make a character, choosing 3 assets which represent their special skills, spells, or companions. You also assign a spread of base attributes to represent what activities they are best suited to, and finally come up with a background, social bonds, and an iron vow. During the game, certain tasks, including vows, are set a difficulty, ranging from troublesome to epic. The background vow you make signifies your character's overarching goal based on their backstory, and should be very hard to achieve. You are also guided to make some key choices for the specifics of your world: power, magic, religion, that sort of thing. And these choices often give guidance for how to start your game with quest ideas. Perhaps with one of these in mind, you dive into the first scene of the game, your inciting incident. This is an event which acts as a springboard to get your character moving and will always end in swearing a second iron vow, but setting it at a lower difficulty. This is the first time the game introduces its core mechanic, moves, around which the fiction revolves. When you trigger a move within the fiction by events such as making an iron vow, fighting, forming bonds, etc., the game invites you to roll a d6 and two d10s. The d6 value is usually increased by adding relevant attributes and any of your character's asset bonuses, and is then compared to the two d10s. If you beat both of the d10s, you score a strong hit. Beating one offers a weak hit, and scoring equal to or lower than both will be a miss. Depending on the move, different mechanical and fictional outcomes will resolve, and other moves may be triggered. Misses do not always mean the attempt is unsuccessful, but will often result in the player having to pay the price, a move which is very open to allowing the player to decide what negative outcome makes the most sense within the fiction, or alternatively, it allows players to randomly determine their fate. Making progress on your vow, traveling, and enemies are handled by tracking each individually. For each, 10 empty boxes are laid out, and the difficulty of the task or enemy is set by you. Whenever relevant moves allow you to make progress by reaching a milestone or inflicting harm, you will fill in the boxes based on this difficulty. So, for example, for a troublesome task or an enemy, you tick 3 boxes when you make progress. But for a harder, dangerous task, you would only tick 2. When ready, you may attempt to make a special progress move to resolve the situation. For these moves, only the d10s are rolled, and the success is based on whether your filled boxes are greater than the d10s rolled, with the same strong hit, weak hit, miss outcomes as regular moves. Throughout the game, players will invent the narrative outcome to each situation, with guidance based on what the move has previously indicated. If ever nothing springs to mind, or if an element of randomness is desired, players can instead ask the Oracle. This is simply a series of tables with random outcomes for various situations, including some cleverly vague ones like action and theme, which can be combined to apply to almost any situation. There's so much more to say about this game and the way the fiction and mechanics work together, but I'm sure we'll get into that now. Yeah, I think that's everything. What do you think, Noel?
Yeah, it's a difficult game to sum up. It's for us at least, it feels very different to anything I've played before. So, assuming that our core listenership feel the same way, then yeah, it's kind of difficult to explain in a short period of time. But that's what we're looking to unpack in the episode. But I think that's a really good idea of generally how the game works. I think you nailed it.
Yeah, it's like you say, it's a lot, and especially for us coming into this, who are completely new to this genre of solo gaming, it feels like coming into a new world, and sometimes it's really hard to kind of visualize all of these interlocking parts. You know, how does that move work? I mean, what do you mean specifically? Like, it's kind of bizarre. And I think we'll get on in a moment just to talk about, you know, the specific etiquette of how you even play a solo game, you know, because coming into it, I mean, the only solo game I've played before, the only solo RPG-esque game I'd say would be things like your choose your own adventure books, or I tried Legacy of Dragonholt. Have you heard of that?
Yes.
Yeah, so it plays a lot like one of those sort of choose your own adventure style books where you have a sort of block of text which you read. You know, the bandits have appeared, they're attacking your camp, blah blah blah, and what do you do? And then you have a few options you can choose. In Dragonholt, your character will limit you on those choices sometimes, but whatever you choose, you'll turn to a new page, and you know the outcome will be said to you, you know, and you'll respond to it. Ironsworn, nothing like that at all. I think, you know, it's so much more open, and you don't get specific chunks of narrative read to you. You are responsible for inventing them. All you're told is the sort of boundaries within which that narrative can occur. I mean, yeah, it's something different, isn't it? So where do you come from? I mean, you said at the start of the episode that, you know, you're like me. You'd never tried any solo RPs before. I know we've played a few RPGs together ourselves, but have you ever played adventure books and things like that? And you know, what were your kind of expectations coming in?
Yeah, it was really difficult because it was yourself who found Ironsworn, Scruffy, and you sort of brought it to me and said this will make a really good podcast episode. We should check it out, and we should sort of give our first impressions of what this entirely new hobby, well, entirely new to us. And I didn't really have any expectations. The first thing that came to mind was those kind of adventure books, but this is a different beast entirely, and it took me a while to wrap my head around. So we kind of alluded to this in the last episode. The reason we did one of the main reasons we did a top 5 episode or last time was because we were already learning Ironsworn and we were nowhere near ready to play it yet, because it was difficult for us to even comprehend how we would play the game. You know, do we just make things up? Do we? I think it was yourself, Scruffy, who said, "Do I talk out loud? Do I?
Yeah.
What do I do? Do I have full on conversations and play both parts? How does that work?" So yeah, we were definitely very green to this, and I didn't, to answer your question, Scruffy, I didn't really have any expectations, so that was exciting.
Yeah, it felt like stepping into a brave new world and not knowing what was going to happen. It felt like very much like how I first got into RPGs, like multiplayer RPGs, like Dungeons and Dragons or Shadowrun, and kind of just being like, well, what? So we just we sit around and we imagine together, but how? What? How does this work? You know what? So can we just make anything up? What? I don't understand. You know? And I think it's a common sort of feeling, especially when you approach stuff like this, to have that kind of. But where are the boundaries? You know, what's different to just how am I not just making stuff up and making whatever happen I want?
Yeah,
And until you know the system and have actually experienced it, you don't know.
absolutely, absolutely. And one of the reasons it was so difficult for me to comprehend is because my favorite role playing games are the ones that make a special effort to make it a collaborative storytelling process. My favorite setting is Shadowrun, and my favorite version of Shadowrun is Shadowrun Anarchy. And it works on this kind of, I'm going to say, like a spotlight type system where you put the spotlight on a player and they're allowed to narrate their own, piece of the setting without the GM getting involved. So one of the things that I really like about role playing in general is that it becomes this collaborative effort. So when you take that away, I was very much like, well, what are you even left with? And whatever you're left with, is it even worth it? Spoiler, yes, it is. And
Oh yeah.
yeah,
Right now, I want to say, this is the most fun I've had with any game that I've played in as long as I can remember. It's my favorite game for sure now, 100%. But yeah, just building off that, the whole thing of role play, it is essentially improvisation. It's improv, right? And that is an inherently collaborative process usually. So the idea of doing solo improvisation, it just feels like it doesn't mesh. The two feel completely at odds. I couldn't imagine how you could possibly improvise with yourself
yeah,
and have a successful and cohesive narrative.
until you play the game. And I think we should stop teasing the listeners and get into what we like about it and why we think it works well, and why, if people haven't done it, they should dip their toe and absolutely get involved with Ironsworn.
Yeah, I mean, we're obviously not a review podcast, and this isn't a review of Ironsworn, but it's going to be very hard to talk about solo RPing in general without talking about the specifics of why we both fell in love with this system. And so, no apologies for that here. This is an amazing system, and it's so much fun. I just want to just quickly talk about, though, that with regards to the etiquette, what our actual decision was in the end, and this came from when we were chatting over how we were approaching it and how we were playing it. And I was sort of just imagining stuff. I was sat there with my pencil and my character sheet, and I was writing stuff down, occasionally putting a note here and there. But I was mainly just imagining stuff, talking it out loud, saying, "Okay, I guess this happens. Oh no, wait, maybe this happens," and sort of stream of consciousness that way. And you turned around and you said to me, "Well, I've been writing it down." Like a story, and that's working pretty well for me. And I was a bit skeptical at first going into that, but yeah, that's perfect. That nailed it, because it makes things so much more permanent. And obviously you can delete, if you come up with a better idea, you can just quickly delete that or add a little retcon in here or there. But mostly it just allows for a much, or at least it did for me, a much flowier style of play where you just start typing, and it does feel like a stream of consciousness. You just type, thoughts come to your head, you type it all out. Don't overthink it. Type it, and you go, oh, that means that triggers a move, and then you do the move and continue typing. Is that how it felt for you? And
yeah, definitely. You know what really helped with dialogue? When someone in the story says, "What are you doing in this part of the Drowned Lands?" Immediately you get 3 or 4 different replies that you could say. So how do you know, if you're just thinking and imagining, how do you know which one of those replies your character actually said? It feels less final when you go, okay, well, this one, well, maybe not that one. When you just write it down, the conversations feel a lot more natural, and you don't feel like, well, I thought how I would feel, which is like a bit of a silly person sat by myself pretending to have conversations. Instead, instead, it feels very natural, and you think, oh, this person I'm talking to, they're not believing me. I really want them to believe me. That's maybe there's a move for that. Oh, it's compel. Okay, I'll do that action, and then the game provides you with some feedback, and that's that really helped me get into the game. And since I felt comfortable to sit down and play it, and I will confess there are elements of the game I still haven't explored. Not just fully, but even some of them even at all. But that's because there's a lot of mechanisms and levers to pull. However, since I've felt comfortable enough to play the game, I've played it every day because it's something that you can. I've been playing on my laptop on Roll20, so I have Roll20 open on my character sheet, and then I'll have my notepad open and a dice roller. And this means that I can play it next to my significant other whilst she's watching a telly, you know? I can't think of any other solo game where I've done that. And that's just the freedom that comes with this kind of system is amazing.
yeah, I mean, I must admit, I've got a bit obsessed with it, and even last night, sat in bed next to my partner, I was just quietly rolling some dice until she told me to stop it, and I started using a dice roller on online. That I can be in bed, just instead of reading a book or watching a movie, I'm playing this game. I don't have to worry about setting up and stuff, and yeah, it's very, very easy to get playing it once you get into it. It's one of those games that the barrier to entry is learning the system, and that is daunting. It is a mammoth task. You're learning a whole new system and a whole new way to play a game. One thing that helped me was looking at a few YouTube videos. There was one creator, Adam Kobel. I hope I said that right. His videos really helped kind of demystify the whole process to me a little bit. So thank you to him. And I think there are a bunch of others on there that are kind of helpful. But at the end of the day, I think it's always going to be a personal process when you're playing something like this. And the way it works is how it works for you. I think me and you are quite similar in that we both sort of seem to imagine things in a bit of a loosey-goosey, almost like a quantum state where two realities are existing at once. And so writing down was obviously really helpful for us in eliminating the multiplicity of timelines that are trying to compete for our attention.
Exactly that, yeah.
So I'm not sure if that would be the same for everyone, and if that's a kind of universal thing, or if some people do think a lot more structured, then perhaps they would approach the game in a different way to how we have found success. But yeah, but I do want to say that writing stuff out for me, and especially with dialogue, makes it all feel a lot less self-conscious. You're not having to worry about talking out loud as a person. And if you are confident to do that, and if that works for you, then awesome. And if you can play the system in that way, that's amazing. But for both of us, I think it made it a lot easier just to be able to put the speech marks on and type the words and imagine the voice, imagine what they're saying, and the words kind of flow more easily in that way for now. So that's our number one top tip at the moment, I think.
Yeah, and like I said, it might not be universal, but it certainly helped us. So what was the moment that things started to click for you? What was the rule you understood? Or once you started playing, what was the what was the moment you said, "Okay, yes, I get this now. This isn't just me sat here making things up. This is a game, and I am enjoying."
Yeah. So yeah, I started to kind of like it. I could kind of see where it was going before I started writing it down. But as soon as I, took your advice and started writing stuff down, the stories became so much more real and vivid. And because I'd had a solid sort of anchor point there when I then rolled the dice, it meant that the consequences came from the previous actions, and I had to invent based on what had happened rather than changing what had happened before to fit the consequences now, if that makes any sort of sense, which it might not. But I'll give you kind of an example for me of when I fell in love with this game and the system and how intricately the mechanics work together. So what happened is I just got past a particularly nasty encounter in a bog with a sodden monster, which is kind of like this spirit that wants to pull you down under the water. And I'd written all that actually been tricked into falling into the bog by the spirit. I thought I was walking out along the path, but it turns out it had tricked me and I'd fell into the thing. The rolls gave me that, so whatever. Anyway, so later on, I made camp and scored an even success. Now, this is how crits work in the game. If you get the 2d10s to be the same number when you roll, so if you roll like 2 3s with your 2d10s, that's called an even. And so obviously you are going to either have a strong hit or a miss because you can't get in between those two numbers. That's how you get crits and critical failures in this game. If you get a miss, it's critical failure. Something really nasty happens. If it's a success, a strong success, then it's a critical success. So obviously I got the crit when I made camp. And so I decided, well, the best thing for my character right now after this horrible encounter would be if a village was nearby. So a village was off in the near distance, and that's just what I needed. A place to rest and resupply and relax. So I headed over there, fleshed out the details in the fiction without interacting with the moves. I could have invented stuff by asking the oracle, but I had a kind of few ideas spring to mind and invented that. And I tried to sojourn, which is spend some time and rest and get some R&R at the village, which was a move and I rolled for. Unfortunately, I rolled a miss on sojourning, which meant they were not they were not ready to help. They were a bit wary of strangers, So within the fiction, I said they're a bit reluctant. They don't want to help me. But I had an asset, which meant I could use a trophy I'd taken from a monster, and I'd taken the Eye of the Sodden to re-roll one of those dice for the sojourn effect. So I re-rolled my d6 and got a higher number, but it was still a miss. And that meant that I decided, well, so what happened is I tried to convince these people to help me. They were reluctant, they said, thought I might be a bandit or an outsider. And I said, well, okay, my character, to change tact, upends a barrel, stands on top of it and holds this eye up high and says, look, I'm not a bandit, I'm a slayer, and asks for help. To which the people seemed a bit like they might want to help out. But just as things were starting to look like they were going to go well, some horrible guy came in and stole the eye off me and said, don't trust him, he's a liar or whatever. And that antagonist then became a recurring antagonist throughout my story. And I was kind of blown away that had happened off the back of all these little steps in between, that not only rolling hits and misses within the game, but the degrees of success and failure that I'd rolled for a successful camp and had a fortuitous sighting of a village. I missed when I tried to get some help from that village, and then re-rolled, got a better roll, but still missed. So had to kind of invent within the fiction. It went better, but still not good enough. The world was still against me. And that's when the kind of the veil was lifted, and I went, this all came about, all this sort of push and pull and interaction with me talking to the dice and the moves and the mechanics and interpreting them in kind of the way that I guess fortune tellers and tarot readers interpret those things. You get this kind of vague yet specific conversation with...
It's projection. You get those results.
That's the word, yeah. It is totally projection. But I'm projecting onto that reroll and that new failure. And I could have just said, okay, it just doesn't work, and carried on. But I decided, actually, no, I did better. My character tried something, tried to do better, and the world was still against him. And that's just one example within the game for me of many that came about from all these exciting little nuances and attempts and failures and retries or partial successes. Yeah.
So
I mean, what about for you? You talked to me a while ago about the weak hits for you were the most exciting part.
yeah, I think the way the game provides you with feedback. So before I played, one of my biggest concerns for this type of thing would be that I would have to wear kind of two hats, like one as a kind of mini GM, someone deciding what's happening in the world and how the world interacts with my character, and then the other one playing my character. And the reason that was a concern for me is because the two are almost completely at odds with each other. If I was playing my character to be like any other person I know, then they would actively try to avoid conflict, obstacles, because nobody seeks after those things. And yet, as the kind of GM or the person deciding what happens in the world, I would know that conflict and obstacles and resolution to those things are what make for good stories. So I kind of saw the two things completely at odds with each other. My concern was that if the game relied too much on me, that I wouldn't be able to create a good enough story and actively role play a character. I wouldn't be able to do both at the same time. That was my concern. But the way the game handles that is so clever. It's something Scruffy said earlier. Even if you miss or you have a weak hit, it doesn't necessarily mean you don't do the thing that you're trying to do. Sometimes the game provides you with feedback like, okay, you're trying to convince someone, you do, but now they want you to do something for them. And you can either think of what the most obvious thing is, depending on who you're speaking to, or you can roll on and ask the Oracle. And that small little bit of interaction that you have or small feedback you have from the game can create twists and turns and obstacles and conflict that you didn't expect. My best example was in my inciting incident, I had almost the whole thing planned out. My character was going to return from a hunt. Their camp, as they're a bit of a Lone Ranger type of character, their camp would have been robbed, and we were going to swear an iron vow to retrieve our stuff back and punish those who stole from us. And then we were going to gather information to by looking at the floor and seeing where their tire tracks went, and then chasing after chasing their cart. That was sort of what I had planned. Now the game had completely other ideas, and what happened was I swore my iron vow. That was fine. I went over to gather information. I got a weak hit. I went to, or was it a miss? I can't remember. Either way, I had to pay the price. And that meant that something bad happened. And I thought, what's the most obvious? I don't want to check for the Oracle straight away. Let me try and figure this out. What's the most obvious bad thing to happen? And as somebody who used to work in home insurance, happened to know that if a place has just been burgled, it's very likely to be burgled again. So I thought maybe someone's still here, or maybe someone was waiting for me to come back to also mug me. So that's exactly what happened. And then I got into a scuffle, and when I attempted to end the fight, I managed to do so, but the game said that you only scored a weak hit, so you're going to have to suffer some kind of complication. So that complication was that the scuffle would have made the tire tracks difficult to see. So now the entire incident I had planned out happened nothing like I was expecting it to. And that was all from the game's feedback. Without a GM, without anyone else, I planned a perfect scenario. And I thought that this is how the game works. You plan, you do it, and you see what happens. Well, no, you plan, and then just like in real life, it could go your way, or it might not go the way you planned, and the world bites back. And that's really interesting, and it's a lot more gamery than I thought it would be. I thought I would have to juggle both hats, but you don't. You play your character, and the game provides you with the obstacles, the game provides you with the challenges, and it's lovely for that reason.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I came in with the exact same fears that. See, when I at university, I studied drama, and at my final performance for my third year, I was really struggling to get into character. And the note that I got from my lecturers that kind of woke me up was, "You're trying to direct, not act." I was, why did you move there? Why did you turn that way? You're worrying too much about how you're being seen. You're not in the moment. And I really thought that this would be something that this system would kind of fall down on, that the problem would be that you wouldn't be able to disassociate between what your character is doing, being that person. And I think it helped that I wrote and from a first person perspective when I wrote what was happening. I attack the bandits. Whatever. I fall into the bog. That helped get me into the character's headspace. But to marry that to then knowing stuff about the world at large and what other people are doing, the movements of the world that your character isn't aware of, and trying to act not based on the information that you know or that you've kind of come up with for the overarching narratives of the world, but just on what your character knows and what they're doing and what they can see and perceive. I thought that was going to be almost impossible to reconcile. But because you move from move to move and you bookend the moves with fiction it really grounds your characters. And that it's only during the moves, I think, where the other stuff is relevant. And you have to decide, okay, something bad happens to my character. What is it? It is now external from my character. What could it be? That's when you tap into that other side of your brain and go, well, I know that I've got the Cult of the Blazing Eye as my antagonist. Well, I know that they were in this area before, so perhaps they've laid traps, or perhaps, in my case, they've graffitied this monument and it's caused angry spirits to appear. Whatever it is, you only decide that stuff in reaction to what you've decided to do as the character in the moment, not your character reacts based on that information beforehand. They only react to it when it happens. Does that make sense? So you choose a thing your character would do in the moment, and then the world pushes back, and then your character learns and more things about the world and has to react to the new situations that are coming to them.
And no matter what part you're playing, whether it's the character or you're making decisions for the world, you can only go off what has already happened and what the game is feeding back to you. So you don't have this sort of grand master plan like you do when you're a GM. It's very, very different. You just get these small bits of feedback and then you have to loop it into the narrative. And it doesn't convolute things, it enriches it in a really lovely way.
Yeah, you nailed it there. It doesn't. It doesn't convolute. It enriches every single move that you take. You are kind of semi-conscious of what is happening in the world at large. I know that where my character's heading now, roughly because of the fact that he's returning back somewhere, what's happening. But even if you don't, you invent it in response to your character arriving there. Your character arrives, they see what's happening, and then either you invent it or you already know it, doesn't matter. But that feedback comes back to your character after they've reached the destination or arrived at the place. And then with your character having learnt that new information, can then progress and react to the situation how they would. And it's very easy to sort of slip in and out of that and not lose sight that you are that person in that world.
And from a mechanical point of view, the way that you perform the moves with the idea of either getting a strong hit, a weak hit, or a miss, it kind of trains your brain to think in like one of the three possible outcomes: best, okay, and worst. And it makes it easy. The more you play, the easier it becomes to create the fiction based on how that kind of works. So I don't think the rules suggest doing this, but something that I found myself doing. When one time my character, his name's Spud, Spud had to he stole potatoes as a child, and the name stuck. The name
That's so cool.
yeah, that's Spud. Anyway, Spud found a crate of goods, but he didn't know what was inside the crate, and decided to keep it in his cart. When he locked up his cart and his horse in the local stable, he's planning to go back under cover of night to see what's in the crate. Now, I haven't done this yet, but in my head, I'm kind of thinking, well, it's under cover of night. It would make sense if there's nobody else there, so you can just check and not have any problems. Then I kind of think, oh, but am I making it too easy for myself? Is that the right thing to do? Maybe there should be somebody there, or maybe in worst case scenario, there's some local law enforcement who are going to give him some hassle because the goods are potentially stolen. And when I resume my story, I'm just going to roll, and if I get strong, a weak, or a miss, it's going to be one of those three, and that's without checking the oracle. That's without performing a move. So it's not how the rules intended the game to be played, but it speaks volumes of how easy the game is to manipulate mechanically to come up with these stories.
Yeah, I mean, you can make anything fair like that, and you can. The Oracle's designed that you can use a kind of probability thing. It's got like a worksheet, so if you wanted to use the Oracle for that specific situation, you could, and say,
Yeah.
well, it's night. It's likely there aren't going to be people here, but maybe there are people here, and then you can have, well, if I roll this, then there will be people there, and if I roll this number, then it will be police, and then you roll the dice and see if you need that sort of. That randomness to determine stuff for you. On that though, I was at one point I wanted to kind of get it over with. I'd done a lot. I traveled to a place. I'd finally located this caravan I was in search for to rescue my parents, and I'd been through so much, and I decided, okay, it's nearly time for the podcast. I want to win. I want to get my vow done. So I tried to, almost without meaning to, sort of cheese it a bit. Now, the funny thing is, the way that everything was set up, there was only one sort of sensible thing to do, which was to sneak into the camp. I got a bit lucky when I was gathering information and found that everyone had abandoned their posts and started worshipping at a big bonfire, because religion's more important to them than guarding the place, which is fine. But my character's not very good at being stealthy, and because of that, directly because of that, he failed a few very important roles to sort of sneak in and go by undetected, quite catastrophically. And I was like, well, that's fine. He's been detected. He's going to try and bluff his way through. He failed that. Okay, that's fine. Now he's going to try and fight his way through. And it was at that point that I realized that the enemy was insurmountable, and that this is actually not going to work now. I can't win. I can't break through, and I can't even get to see if the prisoners are my parents even and gather that information. I got to get out of here. I was on 0 health. I have to run away. And so I did. And it was a real turning point for me in realizing that this game isn't going to let me get away with cheating, even if I wanted, as the player, to do that. I mean, I could have obviously just invented it in the fiction, but I would have known that was wrong. I'd have known that was breaking the rules. Oh, yeah, whatever. He just does it and succeeds. No, that's not how the game works. And you know that when you know the rules a little bit. And so I failed despite wanting really badly to succeed. My character still hasn't currently done their Iron Vow. And at that point, he and me, the player, were both kind of despondent, not having fun, not annoyed at the game, but felt like there was nothing that could possibly happen now. And he ran off into the forest away. The thing is, that has sparked a whole new narrative arc, which I won't bore you all with now. Suffice to say that he's met a bunch of Varu, is it? The dog people, and they've become sort of fast friends already. They have a shared enemy in this blazing eye, and the whole sort of narrative has changed and shifted. And I'm now in a party, not a lone wanderer of actual friends, and it's all completely different. The game has just morphed almost out of my control. Like when I as a player thought I can just go in and do this, and the game said nope. I was suddenly left completely powerless to the story that is just almost playing itself. I don't know if you feel the same way.
Yeah, it feels like this unique story that is developing sort of regardless of not regardless of what I do, but in response to what I do. But you are not in control of how the world, or at least you don't feel in control of how the world bites back, or it has its
Mm.
own living, breathing feeling. And we should probably touch on the world building because you don't
Yeah.
this game. I don't feel like in a lot of other role playing games, you kind of have to learn the lore that goes along with the world, and what's the setting like. In Ironsworn, you get to decide a lot of that during setup, which A makes it more accessible, and B is really fun. So, do you want to sort of just briefly touch on how that works at all, Scruffy?
Yeah, sure. I mean, this system says that you can actually apply it to any world. You could make this a sci-fi game if you wanted to, if you or bring in whatever world you have. I'm not quite sure that some of the specific assets and things would work, but go for it if that's your cup of tea. And yeah, the system says you can do that. But if you do stick with the Iron Sworn world, which is, oh my god, so captivating, like it feels so brutal and harsh, and but flexible enough that you can make it your own thing right at the start of character creation. And kind of I did this in tandem with making my character because it was helpful. They kind of both fed each other. Like it helped me work out my guy's backstory and things like that. You are able to choose certain things, like you can decide how prevalent magic is in the world, you can decide how religious the world is, you can decide how long humans have even been in this. It's a new land, the Ironlands. And then on top of that, you've got this map with different sort of areas where you can choose to set your adventure. The scope for replayability is ginormous. Not because not only are you going to be able to play a new character in even a new location in the world where perhaps you're further away from civilization or closer to the heart of civilization, or even in the sea, in the little barrier isles. But you can also then decide, actually, this time I want the world to be flooded with magic. Everyone can cast spells. Everyone knows a ritual or two, and they can just throw them out there. In my world, it's rare at the moment, magic.
So yeah, and in my world, magic is forbidden, and there's a reasoning for that. But the way you build the world, you don't just sort of sit there and think about it. The rule book has a section called Our Truths, and in Our
Yeah.
Truths, you go through it step by step. It starts with why did you leave your homeland and come to the Ironlands? It then has three suggestions, and off the back of those three suggestions has three sort of quests that you could start, like just sort of ideas. If you're choosing this setting, then this is a good idea for a quest, which is really helpful if
Oh,
you're
yeah.
playing for the first time. But you can use your own, or you could even take one of the suggestions that's there and twist it slightly. Then it moves on to, okay, who lived in the Ironlands before you, if anyone? It just helps you create such a unique world. I mean, if Scruffy and I looked at each other's truths, which we haven't done, I could almost guarantee we'd be looking at completely different worlds. Would you probably wager the same, Scruffy?
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, there might be similarities and crossovers, but I know that you, for example, added in a specific thing. You said that you had goblinization in your world, right?
Yeah,
Which is obviously based on Shadowrun. You're
mhm.
one of your well, both our favorite RPs. My world, I didn't like the look of any of the law enforcement things. Didn't think it quite fit my imagination, so I invented a whole centralized organization of Templars, I call them, who live in Templar City. A very imaginative bunch, and I've got this vividly in my mind how they work, how they operate, how they're structured, and that creativity, obviously it comes from the player and you sitting there deciding these things, but it's inspired by the game. It gives you these breadcrumbs all the way through to help just light up your imagination, and in a really pleasant and encouraging way. You can ignore it. You can say, oh, I don't mind how magic in my game. I'll just say that it's rare. That's fine. That's fine. I don't mind. That's not something I'm that interested in. Or you can say, well, in my game, I'm going to invent a whole magic system where,
Yeah,
where only certain people are allowed to cast magic and they have to wear a specific hat and, whatever you want. And I love that you're given that sort of scope of freedom and that it will work and that will then not only just be a little vanity thing, but very likely come in at some point in your game when you're wondering what to do. When you've got a moment of something bad happens here, invent it. Oh, I know, the Templars appear and they're not happy with me for some reason.
yeah. And this sounds so deep and rich, and it is, but it's very easy to come up with because the way it works.
It's not only deep, but it's personal. And I think that's why it really shines for me that every decision you make and everything, it's not only a new personal decision, but it's rooted in your old personal decisions. It's like a conversation with your past self. And it does that thing that all the best sort of sequels of games or games do, which is to make it all about you and what you've done in the past. When you play, for example, any RPG game, if you complete it and then play the next one, the ones that can hook you in best are ones that go, oh, this is your new character, he's having consequences and fallout because of what your other character did in that last game. And the absolute best ones are ones that don't make that signposted. And in this game it happens all the time. Every step of the way you go, this guy that stole that eye from me when I was trying to get the villagers to help me out, he came and ambushed me like immediately after leaving the village because I rolled a terrible roll, like the worst sort of roll, an even failure on my Undertaker journey roll. And I was like, well, I travel for half a day and I suddenly notice movement behind me. He's there with all his cronies. He's attacking me and laughing. And you get this sort of story based on stuff you've invented before, and it just flows so naturally and obviously. Like, of course that was who was going to attack me. Obviously that guy doesn't like me. And then your higher level brain invents reasons for that. Well, obviously he's secretly working with the Blazing Eye cult. Oh, it all makes sense now. Your character doesn't know that, but you know that, and it will come into play later for sure.
Yeah, it's wonderful. And as rich as that is, it's super easy to get started. Obviously, you have to get a good idea of how the rules work, but when I say good, easy to get started, I mean it's not difficult to create the world and make it feel organic because of the way the game presents the options to you. I was wondering because you pointed this one out to me. What page is it that says that just goes? This is how you get started.
Yeah, that was a godsend finding that. The rule book is really well structured once you get you kind of way around it, but there are some things that are kind of awkwardly placed. If anyone is interested in starting this up, definitely look at page 202 of the rule book. It gives you a literal breakdown of the steps you need to literally just dive in and get started. I think probably the best way to play the system is get a sort of grasp at the fundamentals, learn how you roll the dice. I mean, the stuff I mentioned in the intro there, just sort of nail that into your brain so you can see how that works. But then just follow that list on page 202, invent your world, come up with some fun stuff, invent your character and their backstory, and just dive in. And as soon as you start playing, you might miss a few moves right at the start. I think I missed a few things that could have been moves because you aren't aware of what all the moves are yet. But as soon as you're not sure what to do or your character hits a roadblock, like the first thing that happened to my guy is he hit a sort of literal landslide blocking the main path where he was going to follow the caravan. So he didn't know where to go. And I was like, well, what do I do now, game? Kind of, I wasn't indoctrinated at that point. I was like, well, how does this work then? I'm lost. There's no narrative thread for me to follow. Looked at the move and saw the gather information move. Well, obviously he's going to try and find the trail. So gather information. And from there, you just progress and learn. You roll the dice, see what the move tells you to do, and invent stuff. And I think it does take a little bit of getting into, but especially if you're writing it as a kind of journal entry. I approached the landslide, I did this, and then you roll the dice. It does start to click, and it doesn't take long for it to start to click.
Yeah, and even just going down that list on page 202, once you get to the bottom of that list, you will have a unique world, your own character, along with all their assets, that iron vow, and their inciting incident, and your kind of immediate goal, your immediate iron vow. And one thing I really like about the game is it's so good at generating narrative. And when you're new to the
Excitement.
game, sorry.
Do you mean narrative excitement? Because when I first made my character and my background vow, and even then did my inciting incident, I was excited to see what happens next. Even where I am right now, I'm in just about to start a duel with this recurring character. I'm excited to do it. I can't wait to see if I win or lose that duel.
Yeah, one thing that really excited me when I was still new to the system, and obviously I still consider myself new, but when I was still trying to get my head around it, was the sort of first goal, your first vow, not the lifetime achievement iron vow, but the sort of immediate one that you're trying to do. There's parameters around that. It says it must be achievable, it must be urgent. You set yourself a timer. Why must this be done? And the game kind of tells you, it gives you a lot of guidance on all these things make for urgency and for good storytelling. So make
Yeah,
sure you think of them, because otherwise it won't be interesting. And
yeah. We both started with a different iron vow in our inciting instance, didn't we? Like, my first iron vow was like, I want to repair my armor, and I think yours was different as well. Is that right?
yeah, mine was find a place to stay and some food for the night. And then when I started the inciting incident, I was like, no, 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 that's not going to be their own vow. Now that
Yeah.
this has happened, it's going to be get my stuff back and punish those who've taken it.
Well, I think part of that is that it makes you, and this is what did it for me at least, is it makes you imagine specifically how your character swears their iron vow. So for everyone, it'll be different. So the example they give is the guy sort of plants his sword in the floor and leans his head on it and swears. And imagine the words they say. I swear, blah blah blah. And that occurred to me. There's no way to do that and say, I swear I'll fix my armor, and have it not sound ridiculous. So my
Yeah,
character probably wouldn't do that, would they?
no,
So I need a better iron vow.
yeah, and it means that you're going to have better stories because of the way the game's set up. I'm not a master storyteller. Unlike Scruffy, I didn't study drama, but because of the way the game's set up, when I'm playing it, I'm like, wow, this is really interesting, Um,
I've
and
bored my partner to death by reading the entire story I've written out step by step. Do you want to hit this next chapter?
yeah,
To me, it's a fascinating story, at least. She said it's fine, it's good. So that's good.
but I think the theme that's come out of this episode, I think the most from both of us is we were extremely surprised how engaging the narrative is and how engaging the story is because of the feedback provided by the game and not because of us, which is what I was worried about. I thought it would rely on me, but it's not. I'm relying on the game. I'm having great fun coming up with the fiction, and then whenever the game provides me feedback, I go, "Oh, wow! Now this is going to happen. I didn't even
Yeah.
see that coming."
I trust it to surprise me. Like, I thought it would, like a lot of RP systems, I thought it would be quite nerve wracking. And even RPG games that are multiplayer, there is a lot of onus on you, even with a great GM, to
To drive the story forward.
yeah, and that's nerve wracking and it's intense and it's exhausting. In this system, I feel like I could decide to do anything. I could decide to go over that mountain ridge, and the game will surprise me. It will give me feedback enough that I'm able to then with ease flesh out the world and make something interesting happen. Yeah, I trust that wherever I go in my game, the game's going to help me make it a good story, and that's exactly what an RP system should do. Just quickly want to just mention one more thing about the way that the game kind of gives you feedback, and I don't know if this is just something that I do personally, but it's kind of indicative of the scope of we were talking about earlier, projection within the game. So I'm not sure if you do this as well, but when I roll for any move and I roll the d6 and the two d10s, I always see the d6 as how well my character does at performing, and the d10s as the difficulty within the world. So if my character rolls low, he didn't do very well at what he was trying to do, but that might be okay because the world might have had low rolls as well, which means actually the world conspired to be okay in that situation. The other character, he was trying to compel someone. They were kind of on the fence about joining anyway. They're fine with it. Yeah, whatever. He just had to say the words, and they were happy to go along with it.
You just had to say, "Come along for the ride," and they would have done so. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. If I were to roll a high number with the d10s, then they were stubborn. They didn't want to go. They actually actively didn't want to go for some reason, or another external world factor made this a problem. So in the example that this really kind of hit home for me was there was a pyre behind me, a big bonfire with prisoners tied to it, and my character just saved someone heroically, burning in his massive suit of armor. He came down and he said to his allies in front of him, he tried to compel them, please help save those guys. I can't go back up there. I've got 0. I'm dead on my feet. And I rolled high with my compel, like as high as I possibly could roll. And so obviously it was a moment where I described it as a real clear plea, and the screams from the people behind me was loud and intense. But the dice I rolled, the d10s, were even higher, like a 9 and a 10 or something. And so obviously in that situation, I said, well, the fire just suddenly burns out, it explodes, flares up. There's no way that they can do anything in this situation. And my eyes just shake their heads. They can't help because of the situation in the world around me. And so not only did that resolve the outcome of the compel action, will they help? It also pushed the story forward in saying, now they can't help because the situation is over. And that was just from how I interpreted the role. Wow.
Yeah, that's so impressive, Scruffy. I hadn't even thought. I just saw the dice as, a way to resolve the action, and then because whenever you do a move, it tells you if you're doing this move and you achieve a strong hit, a weak hit, or a miss, this is what kind of happens. Think of something that could obviously go wrong, or think of an obvious advantage, or roll on the oracle. I just saw them as tools. When you put it like that, I think that's really interesting, and that's definitely
Yeah, I mean, it's not something I do on every roll. Some rolls, it makes most sense to just have it a success or a fail. But for certain specific roles, it just feels right. It's like the thing I mentioned before about tarot reading. It does feel like that. Like it literally tells you, oh, look, lots of big numbers or lots of little numbers. That tells a story in itself to me, which is something I didn't have any idea I'd experienced coming into this.
No, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how I can implement that into my own game now. I kind of want to stop recording and give it a go. Because that's really, really interesting. And like you said, I can't imagine myself doing that for every role, but for those critical moments when you get those big numbers or those low numbers, what's the reason? What in the story is happening?
I think it's just about being open to seeing it, and just it really has enabled a way of positive yes-anding the because that's the thing. Each of the moves, like we mentioned briefly, they don't ever say nope, that doesn't happen. That's it. Stop. Just nothing happens. It's either no but or yes and. Perfect improv partner you've got sat in front of you in this game. It will tell you, no, that didn't happen. You didn't manage to compel them to do something. Unless, I think in the case of compel, unless you do this very specific task for them, it's a hard task. It's going to be a big deal, and invent what that is.
And then all of a sudden you have a side quest.
Yeah.
How much fun.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, we've spoken very positively about this, but it is very different to what we normally cover on the podcast.
Yeah, sorry about that, guys, and to all you board game enthusiasts, you've probably stopped listening at this point. But
I was going to say, who do you think wouldn't enjoy? Not necessarily because the game is flawed, but who isn't this for?
I think that the biggest difficulty with this game would be for somebody who is tied to mechanics and will only jump from move to move to move to move without embellishing the fiction around it, without engaging in that creative process. The game specifically says in the rulebook, try and avoid that. Don't get too hung up on that. And it's not to say don't worry about the mechanics of the game. At one point I was like, well, I'm probably spending a couple of days at the village. Maybe I'll just fill my health and spirit back up to full. And then I went, no, 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 that's not long enough. You've got to kind of police yourself with the mechanics. And you can't just cheat at the game. Well, I suppose you could if that's what you enjoy. But for people who want specificity to the nth degree, like to be told, okay, you rolled that dice, you got a strong hit, and that means that specifically you get a +1. I don't even know. I mean, because some of them do say that,
Yeah. Yeah.
What do you think?
See, because I was wondering, we both had the same impression when before we played. Our prejudice was, is this going to be like an adventure book, a choose your own adventure book? And when we started learning the game and playing the game, we realized it is a completely different beast. So going back, I thought, well, people who do enjoy those adventure books, will they enjoy this kind of exercise? And I thought the answer would be yes, but there's so much more agency in this kind of game. It feels like almost a formalized exercise in daydreaming,
Oh, that's a really good way to put it, I think. Yeah, definitely.
And that I don't know if you want more like as much feedback as you get in those kind of choose your own adventure games, you might think this might feel a bit maybe too loosey goosey for you. Do you think that's
Yeah, I mean, I get what you're saying, and I'm reluctant to say it because it's not true for me, and it's something I was worried that would be the case.
nor me?
Is that you have to be able to, and you're encouraged to, and it gives you the tools to definitely be specific and creative and descriptive. I found I got waylaid on a thing. I had no idea what to do with it, so I just rolled the dice to see a location and the descriptor. It's a ravine and it's abandoned. Okay, so it's an old abandoned ravine. What could that be? I don't know. Maybe people used to live here, or maybe not people. Maybe giants. Okay, so it's a big ravine with big caves in the side of it, and giants used to live there, ancient years ago. And that means there's probably a few skeletons littered around. So and it just, you have to be willing to sort of take that step, and that feels daunting when you imagine doing it. But when you're actually in the moment and you're doing it and you're typing it out stream of consciousness wise, it doesn't feel daunting. I thought it would. I thought I wouldn't be able to make those sort of leaps and those sort of steps, but I could have not. I could have just said it's an old abandoned ravine, whatever. Don't even need to think of any more descriptive details, and my adventure would have flowed fine and carried on fine.
Yeah. I agree entirely. It's not true.
I guess the warning would be if you are solely mechanically minded and looking for a thing that will, because I can't even say that it doesn't hold your hand all the way through. It does hold your hand all the way through. It just doesn't carry you. It just doesn't, take you. It's not a book.
It's a two-way conversation, isn't it?
Yeah, it is a conversation. It's a conversation. It's a journey you're going on with the thing. It's an amazing guide and amazing for kind of getting you out of any creative ruts. But it is a creative process. I would say maybe it takes a lot of energy, but I don't think it does. I was able to play it like solidly all day yesterday. I mean, I'm a bit of an obsessive person, obviously, but maybe other people wouldn't have that sort of stamina for it. But I didn't feel at all tired from doing that, and I played it right into the night. And
another thing that's interesting about writing it down is I can stop at any time because you can just go back to it. So I've done it before where I've had half an hour spare before I had to leave the house or whatever, so you just fire up the laptop, open up Roll20, open up my document, and just carry on from where I left off, advance the story a couple of paragraphs and then go, all right, cool. And I can come back to it any time. Don't have to worry about leaving it on the table or packing away. It's very different to other solo games I've played. It's probably, since I got into the hobby, or at least in the last few years, it's the most I felt like this is something completely new to me for a very long time.
And with that, you can go away then and drop it. And usually, I mean, for me at least, I dropped it whenever I've hit a sort of dead end or a bit where I rolled a dice and go, I want to make progress on this silly journey that I'm undertaking. And because my character doesn't have very high wits, he often fails. So my journey has been insanely meandering. And then I go, I failed again. Oh my God. And I walk away from it and I go, Yeah, I can't think of anything. But my brain is obviously still there, partly on it, thinking away, and suddenly I'll have a revelation, and I'll go, "Oh, but what if that guy appears again? Or what if that's what waylays me? Oh, that's yeah." And then I have to rush back and just that little idea sparks 10 others. You know?
And even if you're not thinking of how your specific adventure can advance when you're not playing the game, you can think of the lore when you're not playing the game, you know?
Mm.
I've often found myself thinking, well, how long ago did people decide magic is forbidden? Is that a rule that's protested a lot? Where still practice magic illegally? And I'll be thinking that as I'm like making lunch or something.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Like the levels there of being able to sort of just distract your brain with something pleasant and creative that's yours, your own little world.
How many times as an adult are you asked to create or imagine or use your imagination in the same way that this game does?
Well, no, I mean it's got stigma, hasn't it? Being imaginative and being creative, it's seen as childish, but it's bizarre because people watch movies and read books and get engrossed in worlds like Game of Thrones. Speaking of which, it's I feel like you could if you're a fan of that sort of thing, you could easily incorporate this into a sort of Game of Thrones esque world with
Oh, definitely.
kings and queens and different houses. I've been really enjoying every village I come across. I invent a little banner for it, and that captures my imagination in a really nice way. And that's what I mean when I say that it's personal, it has such scope. I realized last night that my character, if he loses this duel and dies, if we made it a duel to the death and he dies, what would I do next? Well, I could either start a new character, maybe even a whole new world, or you know what I could do? I could become the person that killed him. I could write that character's backstory, write his vows, and take over from him. There's nothing stopping me. It's, you know, that would be interesting. And follow this kind of line of progression of death. I mean, I really like this character I'm about to duel. I think he's a really interesting character. That would be fun.
And I wonder how much more of the lore would come out of that character because it's not something you've had to necessarily think of before. You know, what
Mm,
were his parents like? What was his upbringing like, and what tribe did they come from? And all of a sudden, there's a whole new village, locations, histories that come out of that. So, yeah, it's very interesting. But then, like you said, you have the option to just throw the game in the bin and create an entirely different world from scratch.
yeah.
I mean, if you have a short attention span for campaigns, then you can really mix and match and try new things.
Yeah, I mean, you could even play this totally differently to how we have. I think we've both made it very grounded and stuff. You could like skip a lot of stuff and make your characters just focused on their epic goal and just sort of go, okay, we need to just go through those steps as quickly as possible. And that's a fine way to play the game. I don't know how it would compare or how it would feel because I think this game really does excel at the micro level. I'm interested to see, like I say, I haven't progressed my first Iron Vow, how it applies to then the macro level of your bigger story or wider quest, but I'm almost certain it's just going to be the same but on a bigger scale. You know, that this blazing eye cult that I've invented in my world now, they're going to be connected to my character's backstory. Of course they are. It's inevitable.
Yeah, of course. And I'm really looking forward to seeing how that pans out as well. And another thing that we haven't mentioned, but it's very important, is the game is also completely free.
Oh God, yeah,
The
yeah,
rules, the reference sheets, character sheets, maps, everything you need to play the game is available to download from the website, which we will link in the description. And the character sheet is also available on Roll20 for free, and that's interactive. You can click on, you know, things like the moves that are available, and it will have all the rules right there on the interactive character sheet. So you can start playing this game as soon as you're ready because it's all there for free, which is pretty cool, I think.
yeah, yeah. I mean, we both had a bit of a thing where we put it off for a long time when we were trying to learn it and learn the system, and we got a bit, I think, both of us fatigued by trying to read the whole rule book and go through it step by step and go, well, how do I start? But I mean, the best advice I think that we can give is just go through that checklist on page 202. Maybe there's a rules reference which is really helpful as well, and read how the dice rolls work. But then just start typing words. Do your inciting incident. That can be kind of loosey goosey and vague. Don't worry about it being vague at the start because it will get more and more specific as you play, at least from my experience.
And if
um,
you want to see the mechanics of the game and how they're intended to be used. The designer of the game, I don't know if that's the term they use in the role-playing world. You can tell I'm normally a board gamer. The creator of Ironsworn has his own podcast he does with his son, which is called Ask the Oracle. Now, I'll also put a link to that in the description. And the podcast is him playing Ironsworn cooperatively without a GM with his son. So there's a bit of back and forth between the two of them that you wouldn't get with the solo game. Because they're playing without a GM, it works mechanically in exactly the same way. So if you want to see it in action, Scruffy's already recommended YouTube video. I would also recommend the Ask the Oracle podcast. So there's plenty of material out there to help you get started. And then when you feel ready, just go straight to page 202, get either a couple of sheets in front of you or boot up Roll20 and maybe some dice rollers, and yeah, you're good to go.
I want to make one thing really clear as well. Some people might be sat listening thinking, as I probably would be, and as I was when I came into this, well, I'm not a very creative person, you know, it won't work for me. I couldn't think of all those things like a skeleton of a giant and all that stuff. No, there's no way I could do that. When I first came into it and I was listening to Adam Cobell talking about his journey, he starts, I think, in sort of a boat. He's on a coffin, I think, rowing towards an acropolis or something. And I thought, how does he come up with all that stuff? You know, there's no way I can make it that vivid and creative. But the game will help. It definitely will. Like, if you're in the least bit curious, I can't recommend it enough. You should definitely give it a go. Don't be scared. Don't limit yourself. Give it a go. You got this.
And we will return back to regular programming next episode. Episode 10, we're intending on doing another print and play special. As long as we can get the rules down and get that printed in time, we'll be looking at doing for episode 10 back to board games. So don't worry. But yeah, we hope you enjoyed that. I think that's probably a good time to move on from Ironsworn and look at the responses we got from last episode. Are you happy with that, Scruffy?
That sounds ideal, yes. I'm sure I could go on about this all day long. If you do want to hear more solo RP stuff, please let us know. Obviously, it's a whole genre I want to dive into head first. So if you're at all curious or interested, let me know.
Excellent.
So before we read out the letters, the question this episode is: what do you think some of the barriers to entry for solo RPG games are? And if you've played solo RPG games before, which ones would you recommend we try next?
Perfect. Yeah, I think there's a fair, because we had a lot of ideas of what the barriers to entry would be like. Some of them we discussed on the show already. And now that we're into it, we know that they don't exist. So we'd be interested to hear yours and see if we can address those for you. And
yeah, I mean, I'd be curious to know what if you are interested in it, but something's sort of putting you off or making you reluctant to start, like it was for both of us. I'd be curious to hear what it is for you, if it's different or the same. And obviously, more systems. Tell me them.
Another thing, not really an official question for this week, but is this, do you enjoy this kind of content where we try something new, try something a little bit out left the field, outside of what we normally cover, or do you want us to return back to regular programming as soon as possible? Let me know what you thought of this kind of episode, because it's a bit of an experiment. Okay, so once again, to everyone who's written in, thank you very much. We really appreciate the back and forth that we have with our listeners. I think it's one thing that we enjoy the most about the podcast, so keep that up. More of that, please. So the first one I want to share was from Brian, who's written in a few times.
Hey, Brian.
Hey, Brian. We always like hearing from Brian, and he wrote in response to the Spirit Island episode. He wrote in a couple of days after we recorded the follow-up, the episode 8. So just a little bit too late to be read out on that one, but I'll read it here. So he said he loved the episode about Spirit Island. He was hesitant to answer the previous question about the best artificial intelligence. That's because his answer would have been repetitive. It would have been Navajo Wars, which he's written about a couple of times. But hey, when the game's good, if the shoe fits. But yeah, he says, anyway, just wanted to write in again because I've been playing more Railway Station and enjoying it. He definitely got lucky when he scored 501 on his first game because he hasn't reached that level since. So he's going to chalk that one up to beginner's luck. He says if it's not too late, his answer for the question on episode 7 is that we should play as Thunder Speaker. He thinks that Thunder Speaker is the best pure solo spirit by far. And he also agrees with us that pure solo, Spirit Island, is way more fun at first. He's only recently started playing it two-handed, and that's with the Branch and Claw expansion. So we haven't touched any expansion material yet, but he does acknowledge that is a serious brain burn. The game currently sits out unplayed more than he'd like, but it's still amazing, and it's just fitting it in between having kids and a job and an adult life. But yeah, we all feel that, Brian. But yeah,
I totally get it. I mean, I've still been meaning to play more Spirit Island, and that'll be my next goal. Thunder Speaker, got it.
Thunder Speaker, yeah. Also, a friend of the show and admin on the Discord is Kendall. He wrote that his top 5 to play solo. Obviously, last episode we asked to hear your top 5 lists. He wrote in and said in number 5 it's Railway Station, which is a little bit cheeky when it's his design.
Should be number 1.
A Feast for Odin, then Paperback, then Clans of Caledonia, and number 1 is Mage Knight, with the caveat that he prefers to play all of them other than Paperback multiplayer. What do you think of that one?
Do you ever worry we're in a bit of a Mage Knight bubble, Norm, that it's actually a rubbish game? We just all think it's amazing.
Just having our own opinions confirmed back to us by people who think the same. Yeah, possibly. But I'm quite happy in that bubble, so.
I always forget Clans of Caledonia is soloable. I should really give that a try sometime.
Yeah, I've been on a bit of a journey with Clans of Caledonia because the first couple of plays I didn't like it, but it's really warmed on me now. I just couldn't quite wrap my head around how the contracts pay at the end of the game, but now I've got a better grasp of it. I've found that I've enjoyed the game a lot more. So he had quite a long email from Jason. Now, Jason wrote in his top 5, and he also wrote why he selected each for his top 5. It's a little bit long, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to read through what he wrote, go through the top 5, and instead of reading out his reasons for each pick, I'm going to forward the email to yourself, Scruffy, because it's a really great email. I think you should read it.
Cool.
So he says, "Hi guys, I'm really enjoying your podcast. I'm especially enjoying the fact each of you very much have your own opinion, which at times can go against the grain of the solo community in general. And he's thoroughly enjoying the podcast, so keep up the good work." His top 5 are Castilian, Apocalypse Chaos, Pathfinder adventure card game, Onirim, and then at number 1 is Renegade. I will read out his reason for his number 1. I think that's only fair. He says, Renegade takes the number 1 spot for me, as you get a crazy amount of thought-provoking decisions in a 60-minute game. Setup and pull down are super quick, which makes it easy to get to the table. The rulebook is a bit of a mess, with keywords plenty, but once you get through that, it has Mage Knight-like feel in a quarter of the time.
Ooh.
I know.
Wow. Yeah, you've got to send me that email because I haven't heard of most of those games, and I keep meaning to play Pathfinder as well. So that will be a nice reminder to me if I just copy and paste that list on my to play document.
Castalian and Onirim are both set in the same universe as they call it the Omniverse, and they are either solo only or 2-player games, but all of them you're able to play solo. The only game in that collection that I own is Nautilian, which is a roll and move, but yeah, Onirim and Castilian both look very interesting. In fact, all the games in that series look really interesting. The part about the email I really liked is when he highlighted how we sometimes our opinions waver from that of the rest of the solo gaming community. Is that something that you were aware of before we started the podcast, Scruffy?
Not really. I mean, we've always just been honest. Like, I think you're never going to get us kowtowing to public opinion ever.
But genuinely, before we started the podcast, I didn't know that my opinions were sometimes against the grain of the norm or the solo community.
Maybe you're the norm.
That is true. That is true. But no, it got me thinking. I was chatting to Kendall about it, and he mentioned how sometimes in board gaming there is a bit of a sort of a group thought, not just about games, but about things like etiquette. And if you go against that, it's not very well received.
I mean, I think it's with any community, you just hear the, I guess you call it, the most outspoken voice is the loudest, don't you? And I think most board gamers, especially board gamers I know and have played with, are very accepting and welcoming. And there might be a little bit of, I guess, tribalism, like we kind of touched on in our last episode, when people start identifying a certain way and say, well, I only like Euro games or whatever, and anyone who doesn't like Euro games is trash, you know. But I think that's very rare, and I think for the main part, most people are pretty chill. Although I will say, right here, right now, on record, you should never sleeve your cards.
Oh, well done. We got through a whole episode without offending anyone. And now you want to start that. You want to start that.
I have a platform. I'm going to have my voice heard.
See, now if I was the editor and not you, that would be out straight away. I can't wait for the fallout of that. Thank you, Scruffy.
That's staying for sure.
It's me who does the social media as well, so I'm going to be getting in front of that backlash. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah, I can say whatever I want. You can deal with the fallout. It's nice. I like how this works.
The opinions of Scruffy do not represent the opinions of the audience.
They're going to be next episode. So we've had a few letters for you, Scruffy.
Leave your cards. No, but if we're in this hole, we might as well commit, I say don't sleeve your cards either. Anyway, moving on. We had another reply from Lovelace, who was mentioned in the previous episode, reaching out through Reddit again. They said, I really liked your discussion on the psychology about making top lists and how you start to define yourself by the things that you like. I found myself in some of the points you're making. Here's my solo top 10. Now, what do you think? We did ask for a top 5. Do you think we should read all 10?
No, only 5. Those are the rules. No bending the rules. No.
Okay, so
go for it. Read all 10.
Read all 10. From 10 to 1, we have Newsfield, Gaia Project, Orchard, a 9-card solitaire game, Paladins of the West Kingdom, Spirit Island, Mage Knight, Underwater Cities, Fields of Arla, Gloomhaven, and A Feast for Odin at number 1. They go on to say that my solo games tend to be heavier than the multiplayer games that I play. Some of my regular playing partners don't like heavy games, and playing heavy games solo takes away all the disadvantages, i.e. teaching, checking that everyone has a firm grasp on the game, downtime, getting to the game's full potential after several plays. As a multiplayer game is a lot harder because you can't get it to the table, whereas in a solo game you can get those repeated plays in a lot quicker. Yeah, I agree with a lot of what was said there. What do you think, Scruffy?
Yeah, that totally makes a lot of sense. Playing heavy games solo does eliminate so much problems, doesn't it? Like, there's nothing quite like playing a heavy game and it just dragging during everyone else's turn. Like for our gaming group, I know we kind of stopped playing with larger groups because we moved to heavier and heavier games. And I'm sure a lot of people have had a similar sort of revelation where you go, I want to play with as many people as possible at the start, and then you go, I only want to play with 3 or 4 players because it takes forever.
Yeah, definitely. And the flip side of what Lovelace is saying there is, if you're someone like me, I have the opposite problem. When I want to play solo, I actually have to learn the rules. There's no one there to teach me.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
But you're right. It absolutely eliminates the downtime, and getting other people excited about the game is half the battle, I think. So
yeah, I think with a lot of heavy games, usually there's a massive skill gap potential, isn't there? With simpler games, it's everyone can be on the same sort of footing, but with heavy games, you're more likely to find the players who've played the most are going to win, and that's fine. But I guess it kind of removes some of the joy unless you're playing with players who've got the same level of experience, like Food Chain Magnate, for example. It's so hard to play that with players that haven't played the same amount of times as you have, or at least a few times, because new players, they're going to have a tough time. They're not going to win, you know?
Food Chain
Yeah.
Magnate, that classic solo game. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And it's the same with other games we play, like 18xx. If it's your first time playing, it's very unlikely that you're gonna win unless you're playing with other new players. Okay, the next one we had in was from Cooper. Cooper also wrote in on the last episode, is in our Discord.
Hey, Cooper.
So shout out to Cooper. Thanks for joining. Cooper says, it's not easy doing a top 5 or even a top 10, but here's mine. And Cooper also made a top 10, not a top 5.
Cheaters, these guys. Go for it. Let's hear it all.
Okay, so from 10 to 1, we got Paladins of the West Kingdom, Spirit Island, Marvel Champions, Yusfraud, Role Player, Mage Knight, Arkham Horror, Living Card Game, Gaia Project, Aeon's End, and at number 1 is also A Feast for Odin. So it's number 1 on both of their lists.
Yeah, nice list, nice list. A lot of games I was really, really keen to play when I actually first got into board gaming, and that just keep getting them pushed to one side, like Aeon's End and Role Player, things like that. I when I first saw them, I kind of latched onto them, like, I have to get a copy of this. And this was before I discovered tabletop sim, so I never got around to it. There's just so much to play, isn't there? There's just so much to play.
There's too much to play. They also went on to say they want to play 1862 solo. So that's exciting to have another 18xx gamer in the Discord.
Mm-hmm.
He's got it sitting on his shelf, and he's really looking forward to the latest role player expansion as well. And also Maracaibo, the Alexander Pfister game, and its campaign mode is high on his list. So he's sort of gone ahead and told us what games he's excited to try solo as well, which is pretty cool. Thank you so much for writing in. That's all the feedback we got from last episode.
Awesome. So to repeat the question then for this episode, it is, what do you think the barriers to entry for solo RPGs are? And if you've played solo RPGs before, which systems would you recommend for us to try next?
Don't forget to, if you want to join the Discord, just reach out either by email or direct message any of our social media accounts. We're on Reddit as always _player_1. We're on Instagram at Always Player One Podcast. We're also on Facebook. Links to all of these are, of course, in the description. And yeah, I think that's everything.
Yeah, send your answers to the questions to the same email. We'll put all the links, like Norm says, in the description. And thank you guys so much for listening. Hope you have a wicked rest of your day and an awesome weekend.
See you in 2 weeks. Thanks for listening. If you'd like to support the show, don't forget to check out our Patreon page. The links to that are in the description. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode of Always Player One. Until then, reach out on Facebook, Instagram, or by email to keep the conversation going.